Yeah, we made it. Hello, how are you, beautiful composers? How are you today? All good?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Productive.
Huh? I can hear you.
Productive. I'm productive
Productive?
today.
Oh
That's
wow.
cool. That's good to hear, actually.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. So,
Mondays are a hard day to be productive on too.
what?
Mondays are a hard day, for at least for me to be productive on. It's the beginning of the week, you know.
Well, I won't say what I did, but more or less productive. So,
Okay.
what are we doing today? We are kind of taking a look at one of my pieces, right?
Yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
gonna comment on it.
Uh,
So, yeah,
uh, a celebration for the end of your semester, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I finished grading papers like yesterday or so, and I kind of put the grades in today. So let's say it's a celebration, even if you roast me or even if whatever. Let's just if you if it's sacrifice or if it's I don't know. Let's see how it goes because I don't remember it that well. I took a peek just so I could see the beginning of the video, and yeah, I still it's gonna be exciting for me to watch and listen to it too. But before I put it on, I wanted to say that it was a project for this marimba player called Fiona, Fiona Puigifo. Let me put her name here. And Sean Ting and I worked on a piece for her, right? This was during 2021, 2022, right?
Partially true because did
Partially.
I didn't actually write anything for that project. I recycle an old piece. Yeah.
Oh, so that's another
Yeah.
confession of yours. You confess a lot of things here. That's
Yeah.
that's okay. That's nice. So well, I wrote a piece for her, and it's you can find it on Spotify and YouTube Music, Amazon Music, and streaming platforms and stuff like that. She's a very good player. She's a very serious player. She's very dedicated, and she can play very hard music. I think she studied with you, right?
Hmm?
She studied with you at some point.
You mean study together at school? We were schoolmates. Yeah.
Schoolmates in Hong Kong.
Yep.
Okay.
And we collaborated for a few times back then. Yeah.
She had played your music before then.
Right. Actually, the pieces on Spotify was I mean the piece for Spotify was composed way earlier than the project for her trip to New York City. I think it was like in 2019, 2020, perhaps. Yeah, I don't remember very well.
So you
Yeah.
composed a piece for her. That the piece
Yeah.
was for her,
Yep.
even though it wasn't for that particular project. And the other composer on that project, well,
It's your teacher, right?
yeah,
Laura.
now that I'm speaking about it, the EP extended play, the album, mini album is called Fiery Mallets, contemporary pieces for marimba.
To be honest, I think our titles are usually very good.
Yes,
Yeah, we are good
it's
at
a
it.
title.
We're good
We
at it.
kind of went back and forth. I remember, like between everyone, until we kind of reached a middle point. I don't remember the other one, the other proposal for the titles, and the other composer that's on it is Nora Ponte. You can also find the pieces on YouTube uh of Fiona playing all of the pieces like live, like this one with the scores, I believe. So what we're gonna watch is on YouTube. just so people know. So
And is this is a live? Is this a performance or a?
she did the record. She recorded. She recorded it on one take. Like she kind of like
Awesome.
she's very good. She's a very good player. She lives in where is she living right now? Netherlands,
Belgium, I
the,
think.
the Belgium, Belgium.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Well, let's take a listen to it. Um, Let me here share screen, entire screen. Okay, let's go. Okay, so yeah, I changed that at the end. It wasn't pianissimo. It was more like as for Sando. So I'm remembering a bit some pieces of this. I kind of composed this. We were talking about intention and intuition. I composed this. This is one of my most intuitive pieces that I've composed, I will say. I went back to what I know, what I could rely on. So, what would you guys say? You may
So,
begin.
and you wrote this piece after a hiatus of not composing. Is
Yes,
this the right piece
this
of it? Yes.
this was pretty much a return to form. You could see it in the usage of the motive, the main motive. It's kind of like I wanted to stick it there and give it cohesion to the piece in one way or another, and kind of like the most traditional way I kind of know, and we all kind of know, is with a motive, right? So
Mhm.
you could see that it was a return to form in a sense. Like uh, now that I'm looking it from afar, with a bit of time of having composed it, yeah, it was after a while that I of not composing, of not having produced anything or having recorded anything or having any performances. So yeah.
Cool. Um, yeah, so like the form, like it seems like the mallet changes because
Hmm.
obviously it takes her a second to mallet change it up and it changes the timbre. That it almost gives like a feeling of like movements. Um,
Okay. Uh-huh.
it's yeah, and it almost in a lot of ways it like that like starts to frame the form for me.
And what would you say about the form? What I Because okay, I can talk about this piece from the point of view of the listener, because I don't remember much about the composition process for this piece. Really, I don't remember what my intentions were, beside getting back into being more active, being a more active composer. And I could see like a moto perpetual there, a moto perpetual intentionality, and kind of. But when I see the performer, I think that I also wanted to have these grandiose gestures in a way that exhibit her virtuosism. If that's a
Mhm.
virtuosity. Uh, so, hmm, uh, yeah, you could make a case for a multi-movement work inside a one movement work, for sure. Like
Mhm.
there's a very long outro, for example, and there's a pretty sharp change between um, the moto perpetuo, let's say, kind of two-thirds of a piece. Then there's a change, and kind of the motive is not that active. The register compresses, because if you notice, the register was kind of like pretty much dealing in the extreme throughout the first two-thirds of the. I can describe this as being the first two-thirds against the last third of the piece, which is slower. And again,
Mhm.
this is kind of like looking it from afar. I'm trying to remember my intentions here. Um, so definitely you could do that, but also at the same time, what I could notice is that there are two main cohesion elements that give the piece its unity, at least on those first two-thirds, that you could call the first movement. Again, how many movements would you say there are, Megan?
Um,
Or at least that you could
maybe
notice?
4.
Four movements, okay.
I
Huh.
mean,
Okay.
or I don't know, or for bigger sections that have like
Hmm.
a bigger pause in between, without being gradual.
Okay, okay. Yeah, well, this had to this went back to also to an aesthetic I had while I was more active during my student years, of having more panel forms, or more forms that
Hmm.
were disjunctive forms. So I guess that was a presence showed up, a presence that showed up through my intuition in a way, even
Yeah, I
though.
mean, I think it was also just practical for the instrument because I think it's solo writing is hard because they're either playing or they're not playing. There's not any other combinations you have, and so like when she goes to like change mallets, which I think was necessary for some of the timbres that you wanted. There's literally like has to stop playing for a second, put the mallets down, and grab new mallet. So like there's I feel like there's practicality to it too.
Yeah, that has to do with the visual aspect. You are very sensible to the visual aspect.
It's visual and it's also sonic too, because she stops playing for
Yeah, sure, sure.
a period. Yeah,
But what I'm well, the audiovisual aspect, I will say, you are
yeah,
very sensible to that
yeah.
because of your pieces
Um,
too, and how it shows in your pieces.
I'm also like curious. I mean, this piece, but also like your music in general, like about your rhythmic language, because I think rhythm is maybe the least talked about aspect of music in general. Like people don't talk about rhythm because it's a little bit harder to talk about than like pitch and form, especially like in the like I teach theory and I have a foot in the theory world a little bit. Um, you know, and so much of it is all pitch and maybe form, and then rhythm's like a real low down the list, but it's so important to music, and I feel like it's one aspect that makes maybe the aspect that makes your music the most unique is the way you use rhythm.
I think that yeah, I was trying to remember what my music was about, and I think that a percussion instrument, like to getting back to form, but getting back to writing on a or composing on a regular basis, a lot of stuff happened between let's say the late 2010s, and I had to kind of get away a bit from composing, then came back to it on full force during the 2020s, that year 2020 2021, which was when this piece was. So I guess I was asking myself what made my music, what gave my music its identity, and rhythm always seemed to be at the forefront there. Even if I couldn't really juxtapose that many rhythms here, or didn't do it, still you could see some disruptions in the rhythm. Trying at okay, you have the moto perpetual, let's say, like taka 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 taka, where I wanted to be it to sound or like how I think about music when I listen to a moto perpetual with the same rhythm, uniform rhythm. It's more like a machine, like a mechanical.
Mhm.
That was one of the indications that I noticed and that I like to use a lot. Uh, but then it's like contrasting the mechanic aspect, that mechanic aspect, which is more comes more from Bach's music or something like that, the moto perpetuo, and contrasting it with more, let's say, human rhythms with the fives,
Mhm.
the threes, and stuff like that. The contrast, the ones that kind of like give its, even if you are not doing, if I'm not doing it, if you are not doing it, it's weird to talk about this piece for me because in a sense it doesn't feel like I composed it. Why? Because I, like I told you, it's like the composition process, the time is a bit hazy. I guess that it was during the COVID time too. So, uh, but kind of like going accelerando, you could make them with rhythms. The accelerandi, you could also make them with rhythms in a way. So you could accelerate music and decelerate music just through rhythm. You don't have to write out an accelerando or anything like that. And in that sense, it's kind of like more of a performer not staying in tempo. So giving it a more human aspect on the playback and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's what I would
And so
say.
is the way you like create the rhythms, is it more intuitive?
I would say so because how I didn't picture the whole or the whole form. I just went with with some sounds I had in my head. I kind of heard the motive in my head and went along with it and kind of used the tools that I had in my tool set, and created the form as I went through and kind of visualized it a bit ahead, but not until the end, really. Uh, like how long that last section was came as a surprise right now. I didn't really remember that I had a slow section that took that long. So
Yeah.
it's
And
kind of like,
the slow section stands out to me as being different because a lot of um the earlier parts all seem very like motivic,
mhm.
and the slow section, it starts to really be like melodic to me, and even sometimes like kind of like vaguely tonal. I don't know if that was an intention.
Well, more consonant. I deal when I think about harmony, I will say that it's kind of like adding more pitch, be more dissonant. It's a spectrum of dissonance for me. It's not like I don't try to express tonality or tonal centers particularly. Most of the time. Oh yeah, I would say so. It's like, okay, I want this to be. Uh, I wouldn't know how to describe it. I just reached that point, and I said, okay, I want a rhythm that is kind of uniform and kind of um, funebre, but kind of dark and slow and stuff like that. That's from what I could remember. I don't. I wanted an outro. I wanted to get out of the piece, and that was my. I asked myself, how could I get out of this piece, right? How could I finish this piece? And that was my answer, musically speaking. So yeah, that's what I can say about it from what I remember and from listening to it right now. Well, Shanting, it's your turn to question me
Yeah.
Mm,
or to say your comments, whatever you wanna do. Uh, Before you speak, yeah, this stream, this episode is titled "Forgotten Seminar" because this is what we kind of did when we presented our pieces in grad school. Kind of we presented the piece, although people had them fresh in their head, how they composed it, the composition
Sometimes,
process. Sometimes, well,
not
sometimes.
always. Not all. I think. Well, if you the beginning of the year, not always. Sometimes you just had to present something to introduce yourself to your colleagues.
But just one of the past streams was about what we did in composition classes. So this is what we do in a composition seminar, in a group composition setting. So I'm sorry to have interrupted you, something. Yeah. What were you gonna say about this?
mm,
I'm scared now.
don't be scared. I believe I'm a nice person.
Okay.
Um, I think mm, I think it's good in a way that it is not very similar to the other music for marimba. For
Yeah.
example, you have some tremolo, but
Mm-hmm.
created by the rotation by the wrist instead of like alternating hands.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then it seems to me that it is like I mean it is like a gesture that you also explored in the other parts of the piece because you had a lot of angular gestures, and then like one hand is playing um, the passage and by doing a lot of rotation, something like that. I don't know whether it's true, but it seems to me that you're working on that gesture.
Yeah, I think that gesture was kind of, now that you mention it, I had forgotten about it, but yeah, I think that gesture was kind of like it was an one of those elements that was kind of gluing the different sections together in a way, and that kind of developed in different ways. I wanted to use it in different registers, although I wasn't that successful at it. I will say because I kind of like how it sound in the lower register more. It gives more resonance because on the lower register, yeah, because of the resonance. On the higher register, I don't think it would have been as effective. But I think that were times that where I use it on the higher register and the effect isn't is more of a comic one, wouldn't you say?
I, I
Something like that.
I guess this is pretty obvious that when we write for the marimba's lower register, there is a lot of resonance. Then when then the tremolo will be very. I mean, how to say that? You won't hear a lot of you won't feel like individual notes. You will hear more like a blurry kind of like chord,
Hmm.
like some kind of shades of color. So when when the wrist rotates, it's seemingly it's still effective, but um but when you go to higher register, it sounds less convincing. If you
Yeah.
talk about the the tremolo
Mhm.
in one hand, and I'm wondering, uh, I mean, why do you rotate the tremolo that way? Because when if your tremolo uh, lasted for like two measures, let's say if you have in the first measure you the tremolo begin with F, and then the second note is A,
Hmm.
and then in the second measure the tremolo will start with A and then end with F.
Hmm. Hmm.
It
That's
is what
it's a
does it
thing
mean?
of the down. It's because of the downbeat.
Okay.
Something. If you notice, like some of these tremolandi, were like in crescendo and then in the crescendo of the dynamic. So I wanted kind of like that. If it was possible for the player, I don't know if I spoke with him or not. No.
Because in the actual performance, I didn't hear any difference for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what you truly intended in those in this location. Um,
Well, there are two aspects. There's the continuity aspect in a way. I liked how it looked in the score. That's the simple answer. That would be the simple answer to it. Like, but there was also like the intention that didn't come through in performance. Whereas I should have probably put an accent over there probably. So it will notice that okay, it was a tremolo in two parts, let's say. I think it didn't came through, but
and
in the
also
end I liked it.
and also we
Also, uh, yeah, I was kind of trying to imagine the player as I wrote it with the piano, using the piano as reference at least. Like I remember the Crossfire duo gave me or it was it their teacher. I don't remember who, but yeah, it was like they advised me to write for the marimba if I was at the piano to use the hand like this, so I could get a sense of what they could do because a lot of times composers wrote marimba parts like they were piano parts and they were not effective. Uh, so that was kind of part of the answer, and it was idiomatic in the sense that I didn't have to revise much of it in the end. So at least for the playing parts.
mm, Another thing that
It's curious that you
I
noticed that. Yeah. And
I think I think that may may need some gestures that is very easy to remember. I
gestures
mean,
that what? That are what?
I mean, if there are some gestures that are very easy to remember, then maybe it will sounds better. I don't want to use this
Well,
term fire, but somehow mm, I think I prefer to hear more distinguishable gestures from
Okay.
yeah.
That have
but
more.
I wonder too if it could be like timbre, because I noticed the same thing, but like I think also is that the marimba is probably timbrely a little bit less diverse than other instruments. Um, and the timbres that so a lot of the timbres kind of felt similar. I think the soft mallet stuff stood out a little bit as being different, and then the um, dead strokes. But
Yes.
I wonder if there's a way to like also use like tie timbre and gesture to help with the
Well,
memorability.
yeah. Now that I'm remembering about that particular gesture, it's like it was like a suspension in time. Like I wanted it. I don't know if it came out effectively, but since what came before was more of like going forth relentlessly, it was this gesture. The tremolo gesture was a way of kind of like stopping. It served like a rest in a way. Its
Yeah.
function was like a rest. Stop the music, stop the discourse, and
Well, and you also had quite a bit of silence, and I did kind of connect like the tremolos with the silence in a way because there was so many of them.
hmm hmm
But because there were so many of them too, they did they became a character of the piece rather than like standing out when it was played. If that
yeah, I
makes
see what
sense.
you I yeah, I see what you mean. And that's why in a sense, yeah, you could see various sections and you could see it as a multi-movement work because the silences it what came before the silences and after usually changed materials in a drastic way. And that's why I say that I kind of wrote this piece intuitively because I went back to my old tool set and kind of like uh, disjunctive forms. I was really into disjunctive forms for a while. I mentioned the piece you to you guys like for form, right? From WCU. That's a very disjunctive piece.
What
Uh, I think that I kind of like see that as a model of how you can have very, very different materials into a one movement work. Um, I don't know if that was mentioned in school or if I mentioned, I don't know. I listened to it a lot back in the day, and it was a very influential piece for the Darmstadt tool and that way of thinking and all of that. But yeah, yeah, uh, yeah.
what do you think about your repeated chords or repeated notes in the piece? Because you use it a lot at the beginning and then it's come back later. I What do you think about them?
What do I think about the repeated the notes? Tin,
Yeah.
tin, 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 tin. It's kind of like it's if you see the spectrum of the music going forward or the music stopping, it's kind of like in the middle because it's repeating the same notes, but at the same time it's having movement. It's kind of running. like running in the same place. Uh, in a way, it's a motive too. It serves a motivic function because repeated notes are very memorable. In every piece you listen
Mhm.
to, what you remember most is the rhythm of those repeated notes. So yeah, and they extend all the way to the end because that slow section, how it begins, it pung, 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 pung. So you can argue, if I were to analyze it or critique it, well, what I'm doing is critiquing it from afar in time. It's like, yeah, that repeated note kind of elongates in a way gradually, you might say, or throughout the piece until it reaches that longer section at the end. What do you think about that? How did you perceive those?
I mean, for repeated notes, I mean,
Because I know that you use them too a lot in your music, right?
yeah, I think repetition is a very tough gesture to use because you can repeat the pitches, you can repeat the rhythm, and then and and also you need to think about what's to repeat. Somehow, I think it's very hard, and it is very easy to be a little bit predictable.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow, I guess you may want it to be less predictable too.
Okay.
For example, see, if one hand is repeating let's say a third,
Mm-hmm.
actually because you are operating for one marimbis only, so maybe when one hand is repeating the chord, repeating the third, actually with the other hand can play something that is off the beat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I found that a lot of times both hands line up perfectly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If if repetition means to be regular or means to be very tidy, then we can set these kind of ideas when you return to the repetition.
That's a way to see repetition. Yeah, I
But
get what you're coming from.
maybe you repeat a lot, then it creates a very memorable image to the listeners too.
I believe I was going for trying to concentrate on a gesture each time, and only towards the end I could notice that I would merge the different gestures one with another. I don't know if it was done effectively though, because of the proportions specifically saying, but I kind of reserved that to like, I wanted to have it more uniformly used throughout at least the first half of the piece, and then after merge them together. I don't know if it was effective, but that was the idea. Also, so I remember something about the tremolo gesture. It's like it's an effect in a way, and it's kind of, but it was a functional effect, and it was kind of hard, I would say, to differentiate uh, like functionality from being effectist, if you know what I mean, like using the effect for the effect's sake, or just for having a nice timbre or something like that.
Mhm.
It's like I had to struggle a bit with that, especially since it was a piece, a first piece in a while. But yeah, it's like it poses a lot of problems that you are you guys are talking about, like that I'm remembering right now. And well, I dealt with them in that way. If they were effective or no, you are the judges. I would say.
I almost wonder too, like with the repeated notes, that just based off of other pieces I've heard of yours, maybe is like I really wanted to hear it like much more like articulated and maybe like nasally I than marimba is typically. I don't know. Like really wanted to hear it like like kind of really like kind of have a little bit more character.
Uh huh.
I don't know how one would get the marimba to do that, but um,
More raw, more crude sounding. I know what you mean. Yeah.
yeah,
Possibly, possibly with juxtaposition, like Shontin said, it will be one way of dealing with that. And this is interesting because we're getting into composition problems that composition decisions that we have to deal with when composing. And this has taken an interesting turn. This conversation, this analysis, this critique, let's say. Uh, yeah, probably with the Deathstroke too. Probably trying
yeah,
to use, for example, um, the wrong type of mallets. For example,
like
using
a steak or something, like
yeah
a
different
drumstick.
mallets,
I
something
don't
like
know.
that, or using harder mallets on the lower register and softer mallets on the higher register. That is not supposed to be the orthodox way of using them, right? Stuff like
Hmm.
that could probably have done the trick that you are referring to, using the a confusing timbre or kind of like a mocking timbre and stuff like that.
Yeah, and maybe that wasn't what you were going for at all, but it just in my
That's
head
what you were
that timbre
expecting.
seems to fit. Well, it just seems to fit other works I've heard from you,
Yeah.
and I like that part of the of like your work when I hear that. So like I kind of felt like it was trying to be that, but the
I was
marimbas doesn't have quite that character, you know.
but at the same time I was trying to rediscover what made my music. I remember one of our old teachers, he used to say that I had this dry sense of humor, and he pushed me right, right, so no, not dry, kind of a dark type of humor, or kind of like
Hmm.
not silly like haha silly, but more like uh a bit cruel type of silly in a way. And he pushed me toward in that direction, like using that wryness of my personality and implementing it in my music. I guess that you were expecting that. And I was kind of figuring out my voice again. But it was a time in my life where I wasn't so uplifted as I usually am. So I guess that might have to do with it. Use especially, I guess it would make sense to you since your pieces are very personal and you want to express yourself through them. There's no way of not expressing yourself through them. Is what I will say in regards to this. But yeah, I kind of like was trying to create something, an artifact or something that uh, kind of gave me put me back on my 2 feet as a composer, put me back there. And I guess in a way I succeeded with some things, in some other things I didn't succeed. Like with pieces of most of our compositions, most compositions, I would say. Uh, that's why you have these composers that are on this endless cycle of revisions. I just like it
Yeah,
for
I
what
hear
it
it.
is. I kind of like now that I hear it, and I will make a ton of changes. Definitely, a lot of what you guys have suggested make total sense to implement
But
or take away.
would
But
you
I wouldn't.
actually do that
No,
though? Yeah,
no.
I mean,
I think that it is very representative of what I wanted. Like, okay, it because it shows things that went way back, like the usage of the main motive, for example, it's like very old. But then again, the form itself is more aligned with the late 2010s, or let's say that when I was composing the most, and I had more experience, whatever. So I guess it's just a representation of that time. I should call it. I will revise the title. I will probably call it the COVID piece, or something like that,
Huh.
because we all have a COVID piece. I think. How? I don't. Would you guys revise like your pieces, that when you see a lot of things that you could
I don't
revise?
know. I will be frank. Like it's really hard for me to like see like the error or the things that I didn't do well in my pieces because I'm so attached to them personally and what they represented for that period of my life.
Hmm.
Um, Even though, like, if I certainly there's pieces that are more effective than others. I think I do get a sense like when I'm when I'm finishing pieces, like certain pieces I finished and I've really felt like this is a good piece.
Hmm.
And sometimes I'm really not sure, and sometimes I'm like, I wish I had more time for whatever. But yeah, I for me, I think it's like my like diary or journal, and you wouldn't go back and like if you were someone who journaled, which I am not, but like my compositions are like that. Like it'd be like if someone who journaled went back 5 years to change an entry. Um,
Yeah,
I don't know. It just
it would be
that
dishonest in a way. It would be like saying I was a better composer back then than I really was, or I had more intentionality, or not really a better composer, but my intentions were the ones that I have now back then, and your intentions change, and the purpose of the pieces
well,
change. Like the purpose of
and
this
for
piece,
me,
yeah.
when my attentions changed, not I mean when I was very young, I was just really trying to find myself. But then I feel like really since really 19 to now, so a lot of years, I don't feel like my attentions changed because I disliked my intentions or I my aesthetics or what I was trying to accomplish. Was just that I felt like I had kind of maxed out um, the work in that aesthetic, and I had to kind of open it up a little bit, or else I would just be basically writing the same pieces over and over. Um,
Yeah, I get you.
so I yeah, so I and there are some pieces that are like some early pieces of mine that I are very different than what I write now. And early, not like little kid, but they're like pieces from my undergraduate that I actually quite like the pieces, even though they they wouldn't be a representative to a piece if an ensemble was looking at them to see like what kind of piece I might write for them. It's
Hmm.
probably not a good place to look, but like I would totally like be all for like somebody playing some of those pieces. Like I think it'd be
I would,
cool.
yeah, I wouldn't go back and revise any of those, even though some of them are, especially the early ones, early undergrad ones, don't have a strong personality in the sense of individuality, like in the sense of my own language, and stuff like that. But still, I find them charming. Still, I find them that they were from a certain period through my journey of as a composer. And why would you change that? It's like it's. I think that it's being a bit dishonest. Uh, how about you,
But I
Shanti?
mean,
Do you think? Yeah, Shanti. What about you? Do you think one should change
I
their pieces? One should revise
do
after
you edit?
I
such
mean,
a
um,
time? Yeah.
unless you are going to have another performance of it, I won't revise it. I mean, because if you, I mean, let's assume that we are improving every day.
Mm-hmm.
Then maybe after 2 weeks, when you are like, let's say, 1% stronger than today, you may have another idea to revise it. And then
Mm-hmm.
maybe after a year, you are 10% stronger than now. Then you will revise it again because you have got some stronger ideas.
Oh,
It,
we have two very different points of view here. Very
it, I
interesting.
mean, if
Well, and
you just want to revise it for the sake of improving it, you will have an you will have endless tasks. You will have
Mhm.
an endless task that you must revise it all the time, because every day
well, it
probably you are getting a little bit better. So in my opinion, unless you have you have another performance, I'm not going to revise it. I because
yeah. So you
you
could
you
write new things too, at the same time.
you will keep on revising it. That's if you want to write music, then maybe you can learn even more by composing a new one.
Mhm.
You can get some, you can be inspired by another ideas. You don't want to sacrifice it. You want to write a piece on it. You want to move on your life, right? It, I,
I think
Yeah.
so.
just
Yeah.
imagine sometimes when I talk about compositions with friends, I would say it's just like dating.
Mm-hmm.
In the first one, on your first day, you think that person is suitable for you, is a good person to go out, and then you get to know it better, know him or know her better, and then you 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 your dates become better and better, and then you complete the piece. But once you're finished with the piece, somehow you need to break up with the piece. You need to break up with the person, because probably that's the end of the relationship. You need to finish it.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot do things like after 2 years you realize that something was wrong. I need to go back to the same relationship with the same person. That's not very healthy.
I
Yeah.
like your metaphor.
It's interesting too, all our opinions, considering we are all, we were all students of David Felder who obsessively edits.
Well,
And
yeah, but he's not the only
yeah,
one. Somebody like Pierre Boulez, he was 30
yeah.
years, 40 years
It's just interesting
revising
that, like,
pieces.
a lot of times people think that, students will end
I,
up like their teachers and stuff, and that none of us are particularly encouraged to obsessively edit, anyways.
well, I edit until one point. And yeah,
I obsessively
I
edit,
get,
yeah. I obsessively edit while I'm writing the piece.
and I've told you guys this before, but I don't know if I've told it here, said it here. Like, okay, I might edit it after a first performance or so, and I may edit it after a reading, after I have a recording that I have a sense of the whole form, a sense of the whole how it's going through, of its spacing,
Hmm.
of its proportions, and stuff like that. But after that big first edit, I usually don't. No.
Hmm.
Uh, only
I
perhaps.
typically
Yeah.
I typically don't even do that. I typically edit obsessively as I'm working on it. But then usually after the first performance, or like it's
Yeah.
for a reading session, it's very little to editing. Maybe if I see a mistake in the store or something, I'll change that. But, like, there's not a lot. I mean, the piece I'm working on now is probably the first piece I'm, like, editing. But I've had rehearsals, but I haven't had, like, a performance, I guess. But it's also, for me, it was different because I know the instrument a lot less well than I normally know instruments.
Yeah,
So
and this is
yeah.
isn't this back like back to form piece for you? Also, you would you say that?
Yeah, so yes, I mean I have the last piece I finished was 2019. I finished a piece there, and throughout COVID, I was working on a piece, and I wrote a lot of it. Like I have a lot. I probably was like at least 3/4 done with the piece or more. And I just never finished it, and then I just kind of got excited about a different project. It's kind of in the back of my head. Like it's been a lot of years though, but I do kind of want to look at the material because despite not finishing it, I actually felt very good about what I was writing, and then I just never finished it.
Oh yeah,
So
I
I,
yeah. The good thing is that it was for your instrument, right? It was for horn, so you could
it
use it.
was her horn.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think I might eventually go back. I'm sure give just because it's given time, it will evolve a lot and it will be a lot different than it would have been if I had just finished it quickly. But that could be interesting too. Who knows?
Hmm. How about you, Bang? Have you ever revised a piece after it's been performed like heavily, or do you revise your pieces heavily?
I of course I did revise my pieces, but usually the revision was not very good. And
And you stuck with the original one then?
if I revise too much, usually the piece was not too good.
Okay.
And yeah, I just want to say that, for example, if you because there are lots of factors that make a piece bad or make a piece good. And then if some maybe the original ideas has have some problems, and then you have written so many notes for that.
I wouldn't say that there are original bad ideas. I will say that it's the way that you develop those ideas. Like you could have any idea and make it.
Yeah,
I would
but
say.
I would say, um there if the ideas didn't work, no matter how hard I revise it, it is not going to be too good.
Hmm.
Mm.
Mm,
Yeah, I get what you mean. Well,
yes.
it's a nature of being experimental. That if you're truly experimental, that some of your experiments aren't going to always be successful. Sometimes you might have something that was interesting, but then it just doesn't
But I think that
work.
every piece, well, not every piece and not for every composer, but at least for me, every piece is an experiment. It's to see, you're taking decisions and you are never 100% sure. Whereas those decisions, you have to have some take a leap of faith, quote unquote, in many ways when you are writing, when you are composing. In terms of proportions, in terms of how you use the gesture, how I use the tremolo, for example, how I use the repeated note, for example. If I juxtapose those repeated notes with other more complex rhythms, creating more these textures, more I call them Ligetian texture from Ligeti, but those are polyrhythm textures, really. What I mean, uh, all decision making is pretty much uh, because you are using it with different instruments and in a different context. I think that it's pretty much an experiment in a way, and
Mhm.
in different proportions and in a different point in your life. I say that nothing
Well,
is guaranteed to be successful. You might say it's just
well, I just our approach to music. There are many composers who, you know, know how
Well,
to do one thing, and they know how to make that one thing successful, and they just do the same thing again and
yeah,
again and again and again.
that's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah.
If you're trying of like on that search, trying to find trying to develop yourself as a composer, not necessarily to be better, but to be different, kind of try something different, something that stimulates your artistic growth, let's say. Well, then, like, it's always an experiment, more or less. In regard, I guess that you guys have written safer pieces, and you know when you are writing safer pieces, you go back to what you know or the instruments you know. Even I, for example, use the guitar, the classical guitar when I want to go in a safer route, for example, because I know the instrument pretty well and how it reacts, and I have to worry about less parameters that are out of my control. But then if you are writing for bigger ensembles or an instrument that you don't know or stuff like that, well, or your aim is a different one. When you want to develop your language, let's say in a different way, probably it's good that you use an instrument that you are familiar with, because you can focus on developing that aspect that you want to experiment on. Well, I'm thinking a lot of
Yeah. Or an instrument that you have a lot of access to, especially, I mean, especially it was true in the academia. I've had situations in the academia where I've got to work with players like every week or more, and that was also a safe route. Like, well, we talked about how we both like worked with crossfires like that.
uh-huh.
Um, that you could be really experimental because and have it still feel safe because you would just bring it a little excerpt to a rehearsal and then you could choose to keep it or toss it.
That was a very good experience working with them. I wish I had
Yeah.
worked on another piece with them back in Buffalo. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
How do you
I
feel?
like. Oh, I know. I did do the two. I did do two pieces for them.
Yes. Well,
Yeah,
you were smarter
they.
than me in that sense.
I did. For my dissertation, I did. I it was kind of like it was a set of pieces, and one of the pieces was for crossfires.
Okay. Okay. Cool. And different
So
instrumentation then.
yeah, one was for classical guitar, one was a piece for Zane, one was a
Oh,
piece for crossfires, and one was a piece for a dancer who is a student of Melanie's.
that was a very seems like a very eclectic piece. Was
Yeah,
it?
I mean it was a set of pieces. It was a set of pieces, so they were all supposed to be able to stand on their own, but then they were supposed to also kind of be able to kind of communicate with each other and heighten experience if more than one was performed together.
That
But
seems
quite,
like an experiment right there.
yeah, I mean, and they were only when I put them on was the only time they were ever performed as a set. I think the dancer piece that was the only time that piece was ever performed, and then probably Zane went on to perform the guitar piece the most times. He performed it a bunch, and then I don't know if Crossfires performed that one that much. Maybe one other time, but they did a lot more with Daring Doris. I think it was a little bit. It was. I think Daring Doris was just a little bit more unique
Hmm.
than the other piece I wrote for them, and it was also a little bit easier for them, more practical. Um, the other pieces, like for these like sheets of metal, but there was these really special holders for the metal and that were like connected. So it was like it was logistically hard like to like travel with it, for example. I mean,
Oh,
somewhat like compared to the cardboard, that was easy.
I will guess so. And lighter too. How about you,
Yeah.
Shanti? Do you see each piece of yours as an experiment, or like some pieces are safer? How do you see your pieces? How do you see composition? How do you take risk?
I think I'm a rather safe composer.
Yes. In what
Yeah.
sense? In what sense?
Mm, maybe I'm too afraid of mistakes or issues. That's not
Hmm.
good. I'm not saying that is good.
But that's that.
But
I don't
I'm
know
a
if it's good or
cautious
bad. It's just
person.
We're,
something.
yeah, we're speaking about aesthetics. I don't think. Well, it's good and bad. Aesthetically correct to say good or bad when we're talking about aesthetics. I don't know.
I don't know. I know, like, there's some pieces when I am safer than other pieces, but the pieces I'm safer, like, I feel I love feeling like uncomfortable and like I'm taking risk. I think that's really exciting, and so like I do feel a little bit bored when I'm doing the safer piece. I don't know.
How about you, Shanti? Do you like feeling uncomfortable or taking risks? You said no. Why?
I mean, if I think I am
What I've read
taking risk,
of your last, you're kind of taking some risks there.
you mean the current project?
Yeah, the current project. I think
I
you're
mean,
kind of taking some risk that I pointed out, and
if
that
I,
like
I mean, I had a mixed feeling about risk
mhm,
because I'm a cautious person. If I know I want to take some risks for, let's say, a passage or just a sentence, I will think about it over and over. I take a long time to truly write it out.
mhm,
Yeah, I and I mean it's very hard for me to take risks, but I take risks. But hard means I need like a month. Like maybe I only got 3 months, but I may take 1 month to
mhm,
consider some of the risks, and
mhm,
then
Hmm.
yeah, because I'm afraid of issues. To be honest, not very good, but I'm afraid of them.
well,
Do you
yeah.
find that like your pieces are more like the pieces that either you consider more successful or have been more successful in terms of performances and rewards or whatever have been your safer pieces or pieces that you've taken more risk on?
Is it for me the question or for
For sure. I mean, anyone wants to answer it, but I was gonna ask Shanti.
me? Uh, Shanti, what do you think?
I can true.
Hello, Shanti. Did we lose Shanti?
We might have, but I know for me personally,
Well,
the pieces that I have taken bigger risk
uh-huh.
um, have gotten a lot more attention and performances have gotten more performances. Um, and I do think perhaps they're better works, but it's hard to say really than some of the pieces that I haven't taken as maybe bigger a risk.
Well, for me, it's the other way around. But I kind of the one where I take the bigger risk are the one where I receive more complaints. The ones that are more impractical and
Hmm.
performers kind of hate me for them in a way. And the ones where I take less risk are the ones that have received more quote unquote recognition or performances or whatever.
Hmm.
in a
Interesting.
way. So, but they are not the pieces that I regard have in that high regard. They are not the
Hmm.
ones that I would like to represent me in a way. But it's because of what Shanting was saying. Because uh, in those more experimental pieces, I don't know if some things are gonna work or no, or some things don't seem as practical for the performers. Whereas in those safer pieces, I'm pretty much sure that most of the things are gonna work out for the performers. That you find them in the repertoire already in one way or another. That they are kind of standard and stuff like that. So.
Hmm.
Uh, but in a sense, I think I'm not doing my duty as a composer in a way, because I'm just like repeating old stuff. I'm not doing well. This is a complex uh, thing.
Yeah, no, it's curious because, like, I think for sure, like, the piece that has gotten me probably the most like attention has been like Liaison, and Liaison for me was a huge risk. I mean, I had never done any project remotely similar. I'd never worked with dance. I, to be honest, dance even wasn't even though I was interested in movement. It seems like I would be interested in that. It wasn't on my radar. Wasn't on my radar. Wasn't something I was ever interested in. Only did it because David Felder told me to meet Melanie, and
That's why it's written liaison.
yeah. And
Liaison.
I think liaison, yeah. And I think like Daring Doors probably would be like the number two piece that people would know of mine, and I think that one was maybe more. And then probably number three would be like the string quartet, and I think those are the pieces that I probably did take a bigger. I think I took a really big risk, and I think I was doing something new in those pieces that I hadn't done before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, especially with Liaison and Daring Doris, the string quartet too, but more so those two. And yes, I was taking a big risk, and I think I write other pieces like that.
People can
I
search
think
for it.
Daring Doris
They can.
even now is was really important to like my material.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my material is the material in Daring Doris was so different than anything I'd ever written. It was much more like long blocks of sound. Um, and I don't always do long blocks of sounds, but that's still a very important aspect in most pieces I write. So it's yeah, and pieces that I write that were not as new and just kind of using techniques I know didn't kind of were pieces that maybe got one performance and then that was it. Um,
Didn't get more
yeah,
attention.
it's hard to say like are those pieces they just not as good. I don't know because they didn't get the development as these other pieces did. That
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
players who really really took the time to learn them and perform them multiple times. The performances are just going to get better, and be better, obviously. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that can affect our notion of like how successful a piece is. But
Hmm. Yeah. Well, there's much to think about that. Uh,
yeah, that's
that.
interesting.
Shanting, do you want to say anything? Are you there? Did you leave?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yeah, because my son
Oh,
looks for me.
Oh, that's
uh,
Yeah.
so
uh,
we were just talking about whether the pieces that you are more safe or more risk have been more more successful either in terms of pieces that you like more or in terms of like performances, rewards, that kind of thing.
Um, I would say I usually dislike the pieces that I repeated elements from previous projects. I don't know whether. where I mean each piece in each piece I take some risk, if not a lot of risks.
But that,
But
Mhm.
although I'm very
which
cautious
one is it? Do you
about
take
risk,
risks or no?
I take,
Mhm.
but not like I take like 10. I mean 10 different kind of risks. Maybe I try one little thing in each project. Because I always want to do something different from
Mhm.
my older pieces. So somehow for
So
me,
would you?
I'm taking some kind of risks, and
So
I
would you
always
say every piece you have is the same amount of risk, or are some pieces more risky or more safe?
there are riskier pieces, of course, especially when I try to use more noise-based material. I think decided to change my aesthetics, like 2013 or 2012, and then I
I
mean,
remember that for your more or less for your dissertation, right?
and during that period, it was the hardest. But later on, I would say instead of saying I take risks, I would say I try to learn new things in each project. It doesn't mean that this is risky. For example, if you learn how to use, let's say, scratchy tones for the strings instruments, you learn to use it or learn to incorporate this idea in whatever project. It doesn't mean that this is a risky thing because it's a rather common thing in contemporary music,
Yeah.
right? But I can learn to use it or learn to write with it, learn to alter it, for example, learn to um, use various dynamic levels for scratchy tones, let's say. Learns about the bowing, learns about the the registers, the relationship between register and the bowing pressure, for example, something like this. I would say I'm a curious person. I like learning it. I like learning various elements, vocabularies, or even forms. For example, I in these 2 years, I'm very interested in making some or one particular sections proportionally longer than the others. Usually in the past, I tend to make each sections more or less equal in terms of length. I didn't notice that, but I mean I didn't notice that when I was writing, but usually when I listen to my pieces after work, I find that almost each section is equal
I
in terms
think
of
that
length.
that kind of like subtracts from the form, from the overall form, because you it's like presenting, okay, so here's this part, so here then there's this part, then there's this part. But then again, you also have to take into consideration psychological time, not even if they are the same amount of chronometric, like the same time of length in chronometric time, doesn't mean that they are gonna be felt the same, for example. And yeah. So the quantitative versus the qualitative, and that
Mhm.
kind of takes me to different types of risk, because you were saying about uh, talking about techniques, talking about register and stuff like that. And that's one type of risk that you are taking when you are composing. If it might, for example, let's just say, let's just use a very basic orchestration example to notate a forte in the on the low register. of a soprano, on the low register of a flute, or something like that. Like that almost never works if you are with other electrical instruments, or you know, most of the time, almost never. But that's more of a technique type of thing. There's also the other side is of how you use those materials within a context, within a piece, and if it's gonna be successful for the proportions, if it's gonna be successful for a transition, for for transitioning from one section to another, for contrast, and stuff like that. So it's kind of like it's a conversation that merits more pondering, more consideration of what it means to take risk,
Mhm.
right? Because you can take risk at the very foreground level at the very technique level, the thing of instrumentation. If this technique works within this context, not well in the sound itself, let's say, or then if it works in a context, in a broader context, in the form, if the form works, is what I mean. If those techniques feel the time in such a way that it makes them meaningful, and that's what I was referring to. Then I go back to that tremolo, because the tremolo can be heard as something very generic, but I was trying to use it that in that piece. I was struggling with how it could be more of a functional thing, how it could have some functionality and stuff like that. And I think that that's what we composers have to deal with on a minute to minute decision making uh, process of creating art, art artifacts and stuff like that. I don't know if you guys agree or no.
Yeah, I mean, there of course there's always risk, and there's definitely different things. And I think with the pieces that I feel like I've been, I take the biggest risk are pieces where the entire concept of the whole piece is a huge risk. Um, like for example, for liaison, the concept was the initial concept really was that I saw her. She was doing improvisation for me, dance improvisation upon meeting, and a lot of them were incorporating sounds. Um, and a lot of them were just really interesting, and I really was captivated by her. And then she had said how she had always wanted to learn to play the piano, and so I just really came out of that meeting being like, oh well, I want her to play the piano, but I do not want to teach her to play the piano because she already does something really beautiful that I was really moved by. So teaching her to play the piano seemed not that interesting. Um, so it was like, then obviously that was the whole concept of the piece. And I think same with like a lot of the Daring Doris, it was all conceptual, the big concept, and the string quartet. Like a lot of, I guess the pieces I feel more riskier, the entire concept and starting off for the piece is pretty aesthetically challenging, or aesthetically, I guess, different than other pieces in the repertoire. Um, Whereas, yeah, I think you're always kind of, I'm always playing with timbre and gesture, and so like pieces that are maybe less innovative in that way, that I'm still learning and exploring, but they're not like I'm not reinventing the wheel or anything, in certain pieces.
Well, one has to keep the artistic stimuli going. If not, like, why do this? Well, at least for me. Uh,
Oh, for sure.
well, I think that we've talked enough. We've gone well over
Yeah.
the hour mark. We've been here 90 minutes. Any last thoughts from you guys? I think that this was a
No.
very productive conversation, and it took us places where
Yeah. No. Yeah.
like
I
composition.
enjoyed. hearing the piece again. I listened to it months ago, but I haven't listened to it in a little bit, and it
Yeah,
was nice just hearing
that's
it.
particularly true for me too because I had forgotten a lot of sections, a lot of transition, a lot of gestures, a lot of things. But like the points that were touched upon, like some led us to compositional problems that are more general that I like. I think that we should do this is again with another piece. Piece. Let's see how it goes. Next week we are not meeting,
Yeah,
right? Because it's Memorial Day, so everybody's got the
yeah.
right
So
and so I guess
I guess 2 weeks.
we're doing this in 2 weeks then. So Shunting, you there? I guess that Gabe is taking his time right now. His son is okay. Well, I guess that this is where we say goodbye. So be safe, people.
Bye.